meditations of all our hearts be ever pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. When I was growing up, I spent my summers at my grandmother's house. Those kind of firefly-chasing, creek-swimming, watermelon-eating summers you wish that you could freeze in time. And one summer, my sister, my cousin, and I sought to do just that. We were growing older, and our summers together were growing shorter. So we made a sort of covenant with each other to memorialize the childhood magic of that place. We would go down to the thicket and we would build a fort that would last forever. It would be our secret dwelling place, and we would return to it for years to come. My cousin insisted that a lean-to against an old oak tree would surely withstand the elements. He was a Boy Scout, so naturally we took his word and we got to work. In my memory, we spent days, maybe even a week, clearing out the underbrush, dragging branches across the yard, securing them with yarn and then covering them with patches of moss and sprigs of Virginia pine. The end result was a sight to behold. There in that thicket, we had built our own kind of habitation for the holy. That winter, every time we visited my grandmother's house, for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, what have you, we would jump out of the car and sprint down the yard to get to that thicket and to peek through the trees to make sure our fort was still standing. To seek this kind of reassurance that the promise of summer, that this holy habitation we had built was alive and well in the depths of winter. I continued this practice for years to come, long after my sister and my cousin had forgotten about the fort. I still ran down the yard to check that it was there. 3 years later, when it was just a pile of sticks, and even 10 years later, when nothing was left, still I returned. Perhaps I hoped my childhood would emerge from the recesses of my imagination and greet me there. Perhaps I returned longing to retreat from the chaos of the world, to find some respite in that quiet, secret spot, and to come home again. I returned to that dwelling place in the woods to feel that there was safety in that sacred place. Here's the thing, I don't think that Peter was foolish or short-sighted for wanting to set up his own kind of fort on the mountaintop. I think that Peter, faced with the chaos of the world, wanted to retreat into safety. He wanted to protect Jesus from the suffering he knew was coming, and he wanted to protect himself from the impending loss. I do not think Peter was foolish or cowardly. I think Peter was afraid. In fact, the Gospels tell us exactly this, that Peter did not know what to say, for he 6 days earlier that Jesus would die at the hands of the empire. And now on the mountaintop, he's shown this wild vision, Christ suddenly shining like the sun, in the company of Moses and Elijah, two of the greatest ancestors and prophets of their faith, Jesus, Elijah, and Moses. It must have felt in that moment like God's kingdom was there on earth. And Peter, fearing that the moment would pass away, knowing what was coming on the road to Jerusalem, cries out, "It is so good. It is so good for us to be here, Lord. Let us build a house on this rock. Can we just stay here a little longer?" Peter, enraptured in love, afraid, begs to stay. Surely we all know this desire well. In the face of uncertainty and instability, we too cling to safety and security. We build our own kind of forts. We cling to our loved ones. We repeat behavior patterns even when they no longer serve us. We grasp for relationships long past. We store up money and canned goods, or in some seasons, toilet paper. We fixate on post-graduation, empty nesthood, or retirement plans, even when they're still far from materializing. We build these stone houses with sturdy walls and heavy doors and strong locks to protect those we love from the outside world. We retreat to the mountaintops, to the woods. We bury our heads in the sand. We hide under the covers. We turtle shell, whatever your version of this is. In the face of fear, we seek safety. So I wonder, what does the voice of fear speak to you? Does fear whisper to you in the night? Does it scream to you in storms of anger, or cry out to you in the murky waters of grief and loss? What does fear speak to you in the face of the unknown? The voice of fear booms loudly for Peter. Don't go back down the mountain. This is as good as it's going to get. Stay right here. Peter's request to remain is still on his lips when a bright cloud envelops the disciples, and a voice from within, even louder than the voice of his fear, comes down from heaven. And just like it said at the moment of Jesus' baptism, the voice proclaims, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." The disciples fall to the ground, hiding their faces in the dirt. But Jesus reaches down, and what does he do? He touches them. He touches them, and a healing balm spills out from his mouth. "Get up, my beloved, and do not be afraid." Get up and do not be afraid. And when the disciples look up, they see only him. Jesus calls them out of their fear and back into relationship with him. He touches them and he says, "Here I am, rise up, come down the mountain with me, and do not be afraid. I am with you." Throughout the gospel, Jesus ascends and descends mountains over and over again, as if to reveal this truth of God's boundless movement, God's leveling of the high and the low places, bringing them together so we see God's love in all places. Early in the gospel, Jesus goes up on a mountain to rest, but he doesn't stay long because he hears the cry of the crowd. Immediately he turns around, he comes down the mountain to be among the people, to bring healing, to multiply loaves and fishes and to feed them. And in another moment, Jesus tries again to go up the mountain to rest. But immediately he goes back down because the disciples are on the sea, their boat being battered by the waves, and he goes to calm the storm. He calls Peter onto the water, and here too calls out to him, "Do not be afraid." And of course, Jesus goes up on a mountain to preach the Sermon on the Mount. But what does he speak of from that high place? Only of the holiness of low places. Blessed are the poor, the meek, the mournful, the hungry. Blessed are those who are persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Indeed, the light on the mountain reaches all places. In the mountains and in the valleys, in the rest and in the return, in the heights and the depths, in every place, the light of God is with us. We might hear the words from the prophet Isaiah, "Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. And then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people shall see it together." And so we return to the revelation on the mountain this morning. Jesus does not rebuke Peter in his fear. He does not yell at Peter and say, "Suck it up and get moving down the mountain." Jesus goes down the mountain with him. Jesus enters into the world, into the chaos, so that all people will know that God is there. in the unpredictability and in the suffering. That God's transforming presence is not limited to one place on the mountain, but that God is transforming every place. That mountaintop may be the site of the transfiguration, but Jesus knows that the tomb is the site of the resurrection. Jesus knows that he must make the journey to Jerusalem, that he must walk the road to the cross, for the sun will only rise out of the darkness. And so Jesus cries, "Get up and do not be afraid. Love is here, God is here, you are safe." Perhaps this is not simply a story about leaving mountaintops and releasing our attachments. Perhaps it's not just about the foolishness of making moments into monuments. I wonder if it is a story about the promise that God is with us even in, and dare I say, especially in the dark places. That God turns her face towards us in our longing and shines light onto our fears, promising that we are not alone, but that the sun is rising to fill even the most hidden places with light. Thanks be to God that Peter, James, and John do not stay on that mountain, that they do not build walls around the love of God, that they do not use force to make Jesus dwell forever on this mountaintop. Thanks be to God that they go back down the mountain to share the presence of Christ with all people. The story of the Transfiguration marks our turn to Lent. This Wednesday, we will gather to receive the mark of the earth, to receive that cross of ashes on our forehead and those words, "From dust you have come, and to dust you shall return." As we bear these words, these ashes, may we meet our fear with love. As we are marked for returning to dust, may we remember what glorious things God has done with dust on the earth, what life God breathes into ashes. As we are marked for death, may we know that nothing, neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else can separate us from the love of God. And as we are marked for the promise of life, may we listen for those words of healing that come from the mouth of the beloved Son. "Do not be afraid. I am with you always to the very end of the